Good evening, Chaudhary sir. We'll be
Good evening.
We'll be starting the session in another 2 to 3 minutes.
Good evening. You can see me? You can hear me?
Yes, sir. We can see you. We can hear you. We'll start the session in another 3 to 4 minutes.
All right. All right. No, for some reason I cannot see me on my side screen.
Okay.
I don't know why. Video, I think I'm open my video, but I can't see. I can only see the participants, not myself. Yeah, I can see now.
Okay. Okay. I think we can start now. It's already 6:31. Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm clear and audible.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this month's Friends of Elephants event. We have a very special guest with us, Professor B.C. Chaudhary. And without further ado, let me just start off by introducing a little bit about what Friends of Elephants actually is. So, Friends of Elephants is not an organization and it is not proposing to become one. It is an informal group of people coming together with varied expertise concerned about elephants and other wildlife. The group is a forum for disseminating knowledge linked to elephants and other wildlife science, conservation, and welfare through art, culture, literature, movies, talks, and panel discussions. So, the expectation of Friends of Elephants is that people who have attended these events conducted at this capital city on their own or with their proximity to the people from policy making help in developing appropriate conservation and welfare measures for wildlife, including elephants. So, like I already mentioned, this month we have Professor B.C. Chaudhary, who will be giving the principal talk will be done by Professor B.C. Chaudhary, and the theme for this month is the tale of two giants, one aquatic and the other terrestrial. So that is the first topic for our event of this month. Secondly, after the talk by Professor B.C. Chaudhary, we will move on to have a conversation with Dr. Bivash Pandav on the topic elephants and crocodiles, what they share in common. And thirdly, we'll have a question and answer session moderated by Sanjay. So a brief about Professor B.C. Chaudhary. Professor B.C. Chaudhary is a retired professor from the Wildlife Institute of India with over 4 decades of experience in working on aquatic habitat and obligate species, both freshwater and marine. Post-retirement, he is associated with the Wildlife Trust of India and its aquatic projects and is its executive trustee. He is also a member of IUCN SSC crocodile, marine turtle, freshwater turtle and tortoises, cetacean and conservation breeding specialist group. So, Professor B.C. Chaudhary, we are very delighted and honored to have you here. So, like I said, without further delay, I hand over this event to you. Please, you can please take over, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Aksha. Aksha, I hope I pronounce your right.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Let me tell you, I think it's a difficult proposition. Two different species, two giants, but I think, one is a mammal, the other is a reptile. I think, one is an active, very, very active animal, and the other is, very sluggish, only burst in parts of, it is active. So I think, what I thought I will talk about is what kind of similarities these two giants, the tale of two giants, what kind of similarities they have first. And then I think what kind of dissimilarities and what is uncommon with them. And then I think, a little bit on the conservation concern of the two species we are talking about, two of the mega giants we are talking about. I think, as every one of you participating in this event know, the elephant is a terrestrial megafauna, terrestrial giant, and the other is an aquatic megafauna, aquatic giant. And to let you know, I think crocodiles in the water are big animals. In fact, in India, in the Sundarbans, at one point of time, one crocodile which was killed, was known as the Bengal giant, was considered to be around 30 feet in size. So I think that shows how large a crocodile could be. And today, in the surviving saltwater crocodiles, one amongst the 23 species of crocodiles, they measure over 20 feet. And like one of them is supposed to be in the Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary, active and surviving now. I think as far as the giant elephants are concerned, I think, I probably am not sure where exactly you find very giant elephants, big size elephants, surviving elephants. Possibly in the foothills of the Himalayas, you have some really, really giant elephants. And of course, in Africa, you have giant African elephants. What is again interesting, both the crocodilians and the elephants, their origin dates back to geological time scale. Both of them probably have originated in the African continent. Some genetic study in recent years are predicting that the crocodiles may have originated in Australasia, but that is not confirmed at this point of time. What is also interesting for you to know, the 23 species of surviving crocodilian species, all of them are known as the living dinosaurs. And they originated some 200 million years ago. And in spite of all the problems, at least 23 species of crocodilians still survive on this earth. As far as the elephants are concerned, they originated 56 million years ago and in Africa. And only in the last 20 million years ago, they spread across to the land bridges from Africa to Europe to Asia. And that is interesting. The origin of both the giants dates back to many, many millions years ago in the geological time scale. According to a National Geographic study, elephant ancestors lived in water. I think, what is interesting about the two giants, according to a National Geographic study, the elephant ancestors lived in water like crocodilians, probably the size of a tapir some 37 million years ago. even if it is a paleontological evidence, at least that is something which we find between both these species to have been common, at least paleontologically. The crocodilians are widely distributed, circumtropical in Africa, Asia, North America, South America, Australia, 23 species. Obviously, they don't overlap. Some of them are sympatric, but a lot of species are separated from each other. Elephants, 2 species, 2 extant species at this point of time, the African elephant and the Asian elephant. But paleontological records show them to have reached North America, South America, at least 16 million years ago. They don't survive at this point of time, that's a different thing. But at least both the elephants and the crocodilians are known to have spread across the globe into most of the continents. Longevity, I think both the giants probably live for a very, very long time. Probably some of them, the same for the crocodilians probably live about 100 years or so. And elephants are known to survive for 80 to 90 years at least. That's the longevity of the 2 giants. Elephants are mammals with mammary glands and thick skins. And the thick skin is also common with the crocodilians. Crocodiles are reptiles with a non-porous thick skin with dermal plates. And that is something which is interesting to know between the two of the giants. The 2 elephant species, the Asian and African, share their landscape with at least 8 to 10 species of crocodilians, 4 to 5 in Africa, 4 to 5 in Asia, 4 to 5 in Africa. So I think out of the 23 species, at least 10 to 12 species actually share their habitat with the elephants. The national population of elephants, as far as India is concerned, is considered to be around 25,000. And the 3 species of crocodilians in the country, the saltwater crocodile, the mugger crocodile, and the gharial crocodile, they are about 15,000 at this point of time, from a conservation concern of just about 200 to 250 in mid-1970s. So I think that's something very interesting. From less than 200 in number to have gone up to 15,000 is a conservation success story. And elephants, probably at this point of time, 25,000 Asian elephants in India, probably a little less than what they were at least 10 to 20 years ago. Both of them, the crocodilian, the giant, as well as the elephant, the giant, are in the Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, sometime in the early 70s. And both the crocodilians and the elephants are endangered in the IUCN Red List, with the gharial, one of the species of the crocodilians in India, placed in the critically endangered category. Both the species, both the giants, water requirement is high for both. One lives in water, the crocodilians live in water, and the other, elephant, requires a large volume of water for thermoregulatory requirements. So I think, it is something interesting. The tale of the 2 giants, says at least both the giants require a large amount of water. Both the species also in the thermoregulatory behavior, both seem to show some similarity. The crocs are still, do not make much movement, bask in the sun to increase their body temperature, being ectothermic. The elephants, being actively fanning the ear flaps to cool down their body. One, the crocodilians are trying to raise their body temperature. The elephants, the other giant, uses the thermoregulatory behavior to cool down their body temperature. One is an endotherm. The elephant is an endotherm, has to maintain its body temperature at a constant. The crocodilians is an ectotherm, has to some degree of maintenance, but its temperature is appropriate or approximating the ambient temperature. Elephants are social animals, live in herds, group living animals, and as all of us know, they are herd animals. A lot of matriarchal and patriarchal relationship of the elephants. Most crocodilians are gregarious in an annual calendar, except during the breeding season. Except during the breeding season when they are solitary and territorial. I think that is something interesting to know between the crocodilians and the elephants. Okay, the human-elephant conflict and the human-crocodile conflicts are increasing as in the recent years. I think probably a reflection of the two giants being alienated from their habitats to a larger extent. In case of crocodilians, mostly it is humans who are the victims, as they are in a water medium. And in case of the elephants, the victims tend to be both. The victim tends to be human beings, and also victims tends to be elephants in retaliatory killing. But as far as human-crocodile conflicts are concerned, there is a very interesting African proverb which says, if you wade through the water, don't blame the crocodile. In other words, if you are not in your element in water and you fall victim to a crocodile, there is absolutely no point in blaming a crocodile. Probably similar is the case if you fall a victim of an elephant. Not necessarily an elephant, a human being is a victim of the big giant elephant in a forested landscape. But when the animals are outside the forested landscape, in human-dominated landscape, a lot of human-elephant conflicts happen, not necessarily within the forested landscape of the elephants, but outside the forested landscape, non-forested landscape of the elephants, a lot of human-elephant conflict cases happen. Problems of anthropogenically caused mortalities between the two giants, electrocution, and a lot of innovative ideas of eliminating an elephant retaliatory killing has been recorded both in Africa as well as in Asia. In case of crocodilians, throwing poison-laden food is something which is fairly common, and entanglement in innovative fishing nets and clubbing them to death. So these are retaliatory killing for both the giants. And also, why are they being killed? I just talked about, human-elephant conflict, human-crocodile conflict is a reason for eliminating crocodiles and eliminating elephants. But there are legal and illegal use of the two species as well. We know historically, we know even recent history, elephants were actually captured by Kheda and Mela Sikar, and they were domesticated and used for as work elephants. And at the same time, I think, dead elephant ivory were used for preparing artisanal objects as a livelihood option for artisans. And therefore, at least till very recent times, the African elephant ivory and the Asian elephant ivory were actually in legal use, except in recent years because of the trade involving ivory and a lot of elephants being killed for the ivory. The trade has been banned across the globe, except in some parts of Africa where it is still being used. In case of the crocodilians, the skin and other organs of the crocodilians are in trade, both legally and illegally. But out of the 23 species of crocodilians, at least 12 species of crocodilians are in the legal trade, legal skin trade and other parts of the animal in trade. It's probably a multi-billion-dollar industry across the globe. Elephants in trade for temple use, work elephants after training and so on, is also very interesting to know, particularly in Asia. The Asian elephant is legally used as work elephants and temple elephants and so on. But as far as the crocodilians are concerned, it is basically basically illegal use of the skin and legal use of the skin through crocodile farming. Trained elephants, traditionally used in the armies of the princely states, historically we know of that. And many princely states, many princely state countries captured after Kheda and Mela Shikar and trained them in their army, elephant platoons. And it is known that several invading warriors into the northwestern part of India actually couldn't reach India because of the elephant armies of the kings of those times. Is there been any of the crocodiles used for some purposes like this? I think India is a land of forts and such other constructions, basically as armed garrison, armed use and so on. Captured crocodilians were used to be kept in the water moats of forts as a deterrent to armed invaders trying to get into the forts under the armies of different kingdoms. Crocodiles captured for different purposes were legal till 1968 in India, and Mela Shikar and Kheda Shikar of elephants were probably continued till about mid-1970s as far as our knowledge goes. So I think, the two giants were actually captured for legal and illegal purposes till about mid-1970s, mid-1960s. Crocodiles in all landscapes of India, except in peculiar parts of the Himalayas, because it's an ectothermic animal, cannot maintain its body temperature lower than at a particular temperature. Below 20 degrees Celsius is not a comfortable temperature for a crocodilian. But for an elephant, I know for sure in China, as well as in the foothills of the Himalaya and northeastern part of India, they are seen in snow-bound areas as well. And probably that is because they have a homeostasis. And elephants are in almost all landscapes of India, but are currently restricted to 4 or 5 landscapes: the Himalayan foothills, the Central East India, Northeast and Southern part of India, the Brahmagiri, Nilgiri, Eastern Ghat landscape. At least in India, the Asian elephant is confined to certain parts of the landscape, whereas crocodiles in India, except the cooler part of the Himalayan states, they are found practically in all over the Indian subcontinent. Okay, this one species which is spread almost in all parts of the Indian subcontinent is the Magar crocodile, the freshwater crocodile. The saltwater crocodile is found only in the littoral forest along the coast of India. At one point of time, they were on the west coast up to Cochin, all across the coastline of India, right up to Sundarbans, and including Andaman Nicobar and the Sri Lankan islands. Today, of course, they are restricted into Sundarban, the Bhitarkanika, Andaman Nicobar Islands, Sri Lanka. They are not found in the west coast of India any longer, as far as the salties are concerned. But the saltwater crocodile, India is the extra-liminal distribution limit of the big giant crocodile, the saltwater crocodile. There are 32 elephant reserves in India, and there are 35 crocodile sanctuaries in India, at least as far as conservation efforts are concerned from mid-70s to now. I think, some action is seen in the field: 32 elephant reserves in India and 35 crocodile sanctuaries in the country. Mythologically, elephants are the carriers of some gods and goddesses. The carrier of Indra, the rain god. Airavat is the elephant, is the carrier of Indra, the rain god, and also associated with the goddess Lakshmi, goddess of wealth. And also, every one of us know recently we have celebrated the big Ganesh festival, the elephant-headed god, also known as across the world and even beyond the world. We know for sure that it is revered very, very much. Ganesh is revered very, very much. It is the elephant-headed god. As far as crocodiles are concerned, crocodile is the carrier or the vahana of goddess Ganga, known as Makara. The Makara is the vahana of Kuber, the god of wealth. And in India, on the northwestern part of India, in Gujarat, goddess Khodia in Western India is associated with the crocodiles. And of course, crocodile are known to be revered in Egypt, the pharaohs of Egypt as well. When you talk about the survival problems of the giants in the wild, both seem to be suffering because of the same reason. Habitat fragmentation for both the giants, forested landscape for the elephants, linear water bodies fragmented by dams, barrages, flow alterations, etc. with seasonal flow reduction and water obstruction. These are some of the reasons why there has been a pinch period for the crocodilians in the aquatic habitat as far as the crocodilians are concerned, not just in India, but in the larger part of the distribution range of the 23 species. This is a common problem for the crocodilians. Man-made water bodies, the water that is used by man-made water bodies, shoreline decline impacts the nesting of crocodiles in a big way. It's a water body, but of not much use for crocodilians. Probably similar is the case of the large man-made water bodies for the elephants. Sometimes elephants getting stuck in the mud banks of the man-made water bodies is a constant history, constant story, which all of us tend to hear. Canals are a problem. Linear canals are a problem for migrating elephants. Breaking the path of the migrating elephants is a known fact. And as far as crocodiles are concerned, it is also a problematic area for the canals, because canals tend to be active for some time of the year, and rest of the year they fall victim to anthropogenic animosity when there is no water. It's also very interesting whether culling of elephants, which has been practiced to a finer degree in the African continent, elephant culling and crocodile culling, both have been practiced in the African continent. And very interestingly, elephant culling raised funds has actually supported several research in Africa. And similarly, crocodile culling raised funds to support research by M.L. Modha in Africa, Uganda, and by Alistair Graham, who produced a wonderful book called Eyelids of the Morning. So I think, it's very interesting. The two of the giants have been eliminated cull for supporting research programs. I think, this is interesting to know. I think at this point of time, it is probably something we will not even think of, but this is something which is known to have happened in Africa as well as in Asia. Trophy hunting, both elephants and crocodiles were victims. More elephants in Africa and by princely states in India probably were eliminated or probably were used as trophies by using other trained elephants. I think it's interesting. Use trained elephants. By using trained elephants, other elephants were actually taken as trophies. And in Africa, entire herds were taken away by culling and by trophy hunting. Large parts of rich Americans, rich Germans have actually used elephant trophies by paying a huge sum of money. Trophies still exist in palaces or museums of both the species. Both the elephants as well as crocodilian trophies can be seen in princely states as well as in museums. These are some of the commonalities, what we find between the two giants. What we tend to find not very common, quite obviously very different between the two giants, is the fecundity. One giant, the crocodilians, are extremely high fecund animals. They lay a clutch size of 40 to 60 eggs annually, very high levels of survival hatching rates. And because they lay a very large brood size, very large clutch size, the brood mortality is also extremely high. But in case of the elephants, the fecundity is very low. One calf at an interval of about almost 6 years. And it's very interesting. Both the giants, one is a high fecund animal, the other is a low fecund animal. Both of them tend to reach sexual maturity slightly at a relatively longer period of time. The parental care in elephants is extremely high, very high level of parental care, and both parents, mother and father, as well as the aunts and others, the herd, spend energy for taking care of the infants, the calves. It's a social activity. In case of the crocodilians, only during the nest guarding period, there is a bit of a parental post-hatching parental care, protection, which I wouldn't call that a parental care, little bit of protection by the parents, for only for a few weeks. Not much of parental cares have been recorded. In fact, amongst the lower vertebrates, below the reptilians and the amphibians, there seems to be no amount of parental care because of the larger brood size, where the survival rate and the natality is very, very high. The diet of the two giants, again, I think very interesting. Two giants. One, the elephant, the pachyderm, is a pure herbivore, purely herbivore, but requires almost 200 to 300 kgs of food per day, being an endotherm, and has to maintain its body temperature at a constant and has to have a high metabolic rate. Crocodiles are ectotherms, purely carnivorous, and they require only 2 to 3 kilograms of food per week, not even per day, per week. And being ectothermic, their body temperature approximates with the ambient temperature, but regulated through thermoregulatory behaviors. And that is interesting. The food economy of the crocodilians is extremely high. The conservation measures, there are conservation mutualism benefits. Water bodies in large elephant reserves anywhere in the world. Water bodies in large elephant reserves helps crocodilians find a space, find a home for themselves. And water bodies in crocodile reserves help elephants in using water bodies on their seasonal migratory route and other requirements of large volumes of water when they require. So I think, elephant reserves help crocodilian survival in water, and crocodilian reserves water helps elephants requirement of large volumes of water. The example, water bodies, the Bish-Hazar Thal in Nepal, Chitwan National Park in Nepal, Dudhwa Tiger Reserve in the Tarai, Katanya Ghat in Tarai Belt, Corbett Tiger Reserve, Simlipal Tiger Reserve, Anamalai Tiger Reserve, Parambikulam Tiger Reserve, Mudumalai Tiger Reserve, Moyar, Hogenakal in Dharmapuri, Yala National Park in Sri Lanka. These are only a few examples where you find water bodies in largely protected for the benefit of the elephants are giving the mutualism benefit for crocodilians as well. I think, it's also interesting, of the 35 crocodile sanctuaries that has been declared in the country, several crocodile sanctuaries are also home for, not necessarily home, at least provides a sanctuary for the elephants as well. The Crocodile Conservation Project in India from 1975 has taken all the 3 species out of the endangered category after about 5 decades since the 1972 Wildlife Protection Act. Elephant Project and elephant reserves, 101 corridors identified for elephants in India under the right of passage produced by the Wildlife Trust of India, are probably helping the elephants to a significant degree. this is something which we know as far as conservation is concerned. As far as the people working with elephants and crocodiles are concerned, India has several IUCN SSC crocodile specialist group and elephant specialist group members. In fact, the Asian Elephant Specialist Group chair is from India, the executive director of the Wildlife Trust of India. And it's very interesting to know that India contributes significantly a lot of expertise for the two giants. Members with chair and regional vice chairs for the specialist groups for the two giants are contributing to the conservation needs of the two giants. Huge number of research publications have originated in India for both elephant work as well as the crocodilian work. The 1975, the Crocodile Conservation Project spread like wildfire into 12 different states of the country, and 7 researchers who has done their PhD and started their work with crocodilians, as yours truly, B.C. Chaudhary, also started his career in 1975 with crocodilians, and till today they are working and producing papers. And similarly, a lot of researchers across the country are publishing papers on the Asiatic elephants, the other giant. Elephants are revered almost all over its distributional range in the country and beyond, but crocodiles are revered only as carriers of the gods and goddesses, except by the pharaohs in Egypt. I think, crocodiles have been always in the low public esteem as compared to the elephants. Elephants are in extremely high esteem, except the human-elephant conflict animals. They are killed in retaliatory killing. Otherwise, elephants are revered wherever they occur. And to a larger extent, human-elephant conflict are also happening because people revere them so much, they do not realize a wild elephant has to be treated differently than a captive and domesticated elephants. There are many temples for elephants, but there are only one temple dedicated to the crocodilians along the banks of Ganga in Bihar, in the confluence point of Gandak and Ganga river, which is known as the Gajendra Moksham temple. I think all of us know the Gajendra Moksham story, in which Airavat, the elephant, was caught by Makara, the crocodile, and for 1,000 years their tussle went on. And finally, Airavat actually sought the assistance of god Indra, and Indra came to the aid of Airavat and eliminated the crocodile, and that is how Airavat was saved. So proverbially, the crocodiles and elephants are proverbial enemies, at least mythologically. But interestingly, does elephants support crocodiles in some way? The domesticated elephants are work elephants. They carry on their back a lot of stuff. They carry logs by the trunk. They carry heavy weights on their body. It's very interesting. In 1985, when I was working with the crocodilians in the Annamalai Tiger Reserve, Annamalai Reserve, I was to release about 185 crocodiles into the water bodies of Annamalai, different water bodies of Annamalai. I have brought the crocodiles, but there was no way I could reach the release spot without the assistance of some carrier. No vehicle would go, and crocodiles being fairly large in size, they could not be carried by anthropogenically by human beings. And the only thing which could actually help us carry the crocodiles back into the water release point in Annamalai in 1985, I discovered were the work elephants. Probably the work elephants didn't know what they were carrying on their back, because each crocodile was put in a gunny bag, long gunny bag. So it was not visible what they are carrying on their back. We probably carried over 100 crocodiles into the release sites on the back of an elephant and the back of several elephants, and took them to the right into the release site. Okay, the only care I took when I was taking the crocodiles out and releasing, I directed the elephants to be taken away from the site so that they won't be seen. Elephants are supposed to be extremely intelligent animals. The second lot of crocodiles wouldn't have been carried by the elephants on their back. So it's an interesting story. And that interesting story, I would like to close with that interesting story, My Tale of Two Giants. Thank you very much for listening to the Tale of Two Giants.
Thank you so much, Professor Chaudhary. It was very interesting, especially the story about Kumkis and crocodiles. And thank you for sharing the different aspects of similarities between these two giants. It was very insightful. So,
thank you.
Yes. So let us move on to the next part of this event. Yeah. So now we have a very casual conversation with Dr. Vivash Pandey and Professor B.C. Chaudhary on elephants and crocodiles, what they share in common. So before we start, a quick introduction of Dr. Vivash Pandey.
Akshay, can you be a bit louder? I can hardly hear you.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yeah, somewhat better.
Okay. So Dr. Vivash Pandey started his career as a professional at the Wildlife Institute of India. After completing his master's in wildlife science at WII, Vivash embarked on a survey of sea turtle nesting beaches in 1993. This short 6-month survey led to the discovery of a new mass nesting site of olive ridley sea turtles near the mouth of river Rushikulya along the southern Orissa coast. Vivash Pandey joined WII as a faculty in November 1999. From 2007 to 2010, he went on a secondment to WWF International and coordinated WWF's tiger program in 11 tiger range countries. This gave him a fantastic opportunity to walk in most tiger habitats across Asia and expose him to a wide variety of conservation issues. Following his return, Vivash was actively involved in teaching postgraduate students, training forest officers on wildlife management, and conducting his own research in the foothill forests of Himalaya, Gangetic floodplains, and in the highlands of central India. Vivash is currently on a secondment from the WII to BNHS and has joined BNHS on January 1st, 2021 as its director. He appeals to the citizens of India to become BNHS members and be a part of conservation movement of this great country. So thank you, Dr. Vivash Pandey for joining us here. Now I hand over the session to you and Professor B.C. Chaudhary for the conversation.
Good evening. Thanks for that rather elaborate introduction. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. It was nice, sir. Nice to listen to you talking about elephants and crocodiles. I didn't realize you know so much about elephants.
No.
It was good to refresh all my memories on elephants. Yeah, I mean, I would like. So many of you might have seen a very recent video, day before yesterday. It was circulated almost all over the country, maybe outside the country also. There was a young bull, young tusker in River Mahanadi, struggling to come out of water. And Mahanadi, as you know, is the only river system in the country which has 3 species of crocodiles at the moment. We have Gharial upstream in the Saptkosia Gorge Sanctuary. We have Magar there. And at the mouth of River Mahanadi, we have the Vitarkanika National Park, where we have saltwater crocodiles. So this place where this elephant was stuck, it was in the middle of, close to a big city in Orissa called Cuttack. Very close to that. I actually grew up as a child. I grew up in that area. And definitely there was a lot of water, but not the kind of water I used to see or I see in river Ganga in peak monsoon. It's like Ganga is huge, and near Haridwar, every day morning you go and see, or every day evening you go and see, you see 8-10 bulls crossing effortlessly. And compared to the current in a Himalayan river like Ganga, there was absolutely not, that kind of current was not there in river Mahanadi. But still the elephant was struggling. And I don't know, I mean, people say that the elephant is dead now. I have no clear information about that. It's something which has to be very carefully analyzed. They are such expert swimmers. When they are negotiating a river like Ganga in full speed during the peak monsoon, what has gone wrong with this young bull in Mahanadi river that it has not managed to cross that river? Compared to Ganga, Mahanadi, I mean, it's a huge river, but that kind of water flow, that kind of current is not there that this animal succumbs to, stays there for a day or a couple of days, gets stuck at one place, and eventually, if the news report has to be believed, eventually it dies. So that actually brings us to a very intricate matter as far as elephant behavior is concerned, as far as elephant intelligence is concerned. As sir, you told in your talk, they are extremely intelligent animals, and not only intelligent, and this intelligence in elephant actually comes through a process of learning. And
yeah, Vibhas, I think it's also interesting. I think, many people don't realize crocodiles are intelligent animals too. I think, one of the ways crocodile population estimation is done is by a searchlight, being used, so that the tapetum layer of the eyes of the crocodiles reflects back the ruby red color. And people, those who have gone for a crocodile population estimation using a spotlight, they found first time using a spotlight in an aquatic habitat, they can count a very large number of crocodiles. But if they do it in the immediately after second day, third day, fourth day, the numbers tend to decline. They are extremely intelligent animals that, something is happening with the spotlight, and therefore they will actually submerge into the water. And that is said, the intelligence of these crocodilians are also to be respected, that they realize that something is happening, and therefore they actually get completely submerged in water, so that your crocodile counts become very ineffective. I think, that is the intelligence level of the two giants.
Absolutely. Most animals are actually very intelligent. Crocodiles effortlessly go upstream of the river to gulp those, which is a very common thing in case of crocodilians, and then come downstream. So upstream, downstream movement has been very well recorded in case of crocodiles. So what I was telling in case of this unfortunate event that happened, the difference is when you go and see elephants crossing Ganga, there will be 5 elephants, 7 elephants, up to 18, 19 elephants we have seen crossing. But what happens is there will be a very large bull, which won't be leading the group, actually will be trailing the group. So the large bull actually allows the younger ones to move ahead, move in front, trains them, shows them the path, and then finally he will be the last one to cross the river. So that kind of thing may be lacking in a place like Mahanadi, where elephant population has been severely hammered. So there are not many bulls. This is a very young bull that must be exploring the area, might not be well versed with the river crossing, exactly which area they have to cross, because they tend to cross the river at very, very fixed paths. And all this knowledge gets transferred through generations. So elephants, 12 to 15-year-old, when the bull becomes 12 to 15-year-old, he is pushed out of the group. So it's primarily a matriarchal society. Only females live in group. Bulls are pushed out when they're 12 to 15-year-old. And all these young bulls which are pushed out of the group, they form all male group. And then all male groups get associated with an older bull. And that older bull actually teaches them etiquettes of elephant society. It tells them where to go, where to explore the resources. So if we remove older bulls or older bulls are removed from the population, the younger ones actually aimlessly move in the area. So I would explain the situation like this. In a place like Mahanadi, where the forest division, elephant population, I won't say is very healthy in terms of what we see in case of bulls or the male population in northern India. So that lack of knowledge or transfer of knowledge is actually happening, and we need to analyze it from that angle. So that's what I would say. That elephant was there in the middle of crocodile habitat day before yesterday. Despite being expert swimmer, finally it couldn't survive. I hope it has survived, but the news report says that the animal has perished. So yeah, so that's what. If you can explain anything, sir, on that matter, it will be good.
Well, I think, I saw the video and the way I think the elephant was being pushed, being actually chased in this by a speedboat. I think, they were actually the conflict was between the two things: how to chase the elephant at one, and the second, how to save the boat from the fast current of the river, and that too very close to the barrage gate. I think, in the whole process, I think the boat capsized. But I see the elephants, the lone bull, I think, was making a beeline, moving out of they said 6 hours, it was stuck at one place. But the video doesn't seem to be so. The video shows the elephant actually moving in one direction in the water. And whether it actually moved and with the disturbance that was created by a whole lot of rescue and making and people has actually taken the elephant rather than onto the bank back into the river is a question mark. And whether the elephant actually moved in the swift current, further downstream, that is something which I'm not sure about. Because they still seem to say they don't know what happened to the elephant. As they say, what happened to one of the rescuer, whose body is missing, they don't know what has happened to that body. So I think, it's interesting to know the effort that was being done by a huge number of rescue team, as you say, to an elephant probably whose intelligence level at this point of time was probably rather low, because it has not been taught properly what needs to be done by a matriarchal female or a large bull elephant. As you say, the proportion of bull elephants in Orissa is relatively less in number. And that is something, which I think, in 1975, when we started our career, and we were in the Satkosia God Sanctuary, where we used to go from Angul to Tikarpada. And within that journey from Angul to Tikarpada, which was not really very long distance, it's probably 35 to 40 kilometers or so. And within that 35 to 40 kilometers, in fact, Tikarpada is a tribal word, meaning it is a herd of elephants, congregation of a herd of elephants. That is Tikarpada means. And we used to see elephant herds as large as 25 to 30 animals, and with larger bulls present. I'm talking of 1975. And today, we see videos of elephants, groups in elephant herds in videos, elephants crossing into human-dominated landscape, and people taking videos, trying to take selfies with the elephant herd and so on. But we don't see too many large bull elephants in the Orissa case also. So I think, the central Indian population of elephants is probably devoid of very large number of male elephants, and therefore the intelligence level or the training level that needs to be communicated to the younger generation of elephants, as you say, is lacking probably in that. And the recent death of the elephants, or the recent missing of the elephants in the Mundali barrage, is probably a reflection of that. I think, that's all I can say at this point of time, as the case may be.
So having said that, I mean, almost from 1970s, 5 decades of conservation measures have actually resulted in both crocodiles and elephants doing pretty well in India. In fact,
Good.
I would say certain pockets, we have to manage our elephant population. Like states like Chhattisgarh, Orissa, Jharkhand, we just cannot afford to elephants roam over such a massive area, that too in a human-dominated landscape. So I won't say that every elephant population in the country needs active management, but there are certain pockets where actually population control measures need to be taken. And for that matter, I would say like certain areas where saltwater crocodiles are getting overabundant. We have a small area, say 200, 300 square kilometer area, and there we are trying to protect, say 500, 600 or 700 crocodile. Or right now, I believe there are more than 1,000 crocodiles. So, so localized in a local area, very active wildlife management is required, and in terms of managing the population or controlling the population of both these species.
I agree with you. I think, I think as I told you, I think, till about mid-70s, the Kheda and Mela Shikar was being practiced. In fact, the Angul division of Odisha is recorded to be the last elephant removal by one of these methods. In the DFO's compound was where the actually captured elephants were actually brought in and trained. That is what I have read in papers. But I think, as far as crocodiles are concerned, the high density of crocodiles in Bhitarkanika sanctuary, probably the world's highest density of crocodiles anywhere you can see. And the also cases of, a lot of human crocodile related mortality that is happening in Bhitarkanika is a reflection of the high density. And as I told you, the crocodilians are territorial during the breeding season, and the adult males, big males, territorial males, will drive the subdominant, less dominant males away from the territory of the, because they are polygamous, they will mate with several females. They will not allow a second dominant male to be mating with a female. But that is also probably a mechanism of genetically more fittest animal surviving, fittest animals being impregnated by the dominant male. And the subdominant individuals become the victim, and they go out of the good habitat into suboptimal habitat, into the human-dominated landscape. That is where the human crocodile conflict cases happen. And I think, similar is the case of human crocodile conflict in Sundarbans, particularly in a range where a lot of illegal fishing or fishing does happen, does tourism happen, and so on. So I think, I was analyzing 103 cases of human crocodile conflict in Sundarban. I was also analyzing over 35 to 40 cases of human crocodile conflict in Bhitarkanika, and also similar numbers of human crocodile conflict in Andaman Nicobar Island. I think, this is the behavioral aspect of the animals is a reflection of the human crocodile conflict situation. And I think, that is something probably true for the other giant, the elephants. Why the human elephant conflict cases are increasing is a reflection of they being pushed out into suboptimal habitat. Pushing the giants into suboptimal habitat in both the case of elephants and case of crocodilians is a reflection of the human crocodile or human elephant conflict. Maybe you have something to say on that.
Yeah, absolutely. See, the problem with elephants is there. I mean, both crocodiles as well as elephants. In one way, they are similar because they are long-ranging, large birds. Even in a place like Chambal, we think that gharial can be protected in a small stretch, and radio-collared gharials have been found to move over more than 100 kilometers along the river, linear movement along the river. So the river fragmentation in case of crocodiles, like excess extraction of water in the river, is a big problem for a species like gharial, which has got very poor leg musculature, cannot afford to walk on the land properly. Barely
yeah,
it
because
manages
I think, when
crawl.
you said, I think, the crocodiles in Chambal moves about 100 kilometers linear. The Royal Chittoban National Park, the Chittoban National Park in Nepal, they have a gharial conservation project, and they release crocodiles in the Narayani River. And they come down, I think Gandak upstream is called Narayani, and crocodiles, gharials released in the Narayani River. Actually, they come downstream into India, crossing the Gandak barrage. And we have caught, some of them, and we have actually captured some animals from zoos and fitted them with satellite transmitters. And interestingly, the animals which have been scale clipped and released in Narayani, and the animals the gharials which has been tagged with satellite transmitters by the Wildlife Trust of India, they have migrated 900 kilometers and 1100 kilometers into the West Bengal border. So I think, in a linear river, if there are no obstructions, these are extremely large moving range of the animals. I think, depending on the season where they move into.
Absolutely. One of our radio-collared elephants in Chhattisgarh was moving from Orissa, Sundargarh district in Orissa, entire Chhattisgarh, going to Madhya Pradesh. So it was covering 3 states. Just like gharial, you told 900 kilometers. They are capable of moving hundreds of kilometers, provided they are given unhindered access. In case of crocodiles, it is water in the river. And in case of elephants, it's a contiguous belt of forest. And the moment forest or their habitat is fragmented, the problem starts there, both for the species as well as for the human.
Yeah, true. Very, very true. I think, both the species, both the giants, the giants means, we'll have to realize a giant, because of the body size itself, they will require a large home range. They will probably require a large territory. And that kind of territory must be maintained unhindered, either whether it is a crocodilian or whether it is an elephant, whether it is a tiger, whatever the wild animal we are talking of, depending on the large body size of an animal, its home range would be also very, very large. And therefore, the basic understanding must be there. A giant will require a large home range.
So how much time we have now, or we'll finish it after? I have one more point to make, one more thing to discuss. That is, both these species actually benefit humans in a big way. If we are talking about saving an animal like elephant, we have to protect few thousand square kilometers of forest. And if you are protecting few thousand square kilometers of forest, you are protecting a huge catchment of area, which in turn will only be beneficial to humans in terms of getting water, in terms of getting the agriculture security of their agriculture field. Similarly, protecting crocodiles in a reservoir, the normal apprehension is crocodiles will eat all the fish, but actually it ends up in increasing the productivity of fisheries productivity of the area. So if you can share some experience in this regard, it would be great.
Yeah, sure. I think, I actually talked about the food economy of crocodilians. If an adult crocodile weighing about 80 to 90 kilograms will require almost a year to eat 90 kilograms of food, almost a year. I think, per week, only 2 to 3 kilograms of food, maybe even less than that amount. So that is the food economy when the crocodiles are concerned. And in a aquatic habitat, it's an ambitious feeder, wait for an animal to come towards it, and then only try to capture it. I think, it is known that crocodilians do not prefer to eat fast-moving animals, fast-moving fish, which escape from their ambush. But it is only the slightly non-fittest fish, which are captured. And it's also known that the crocodilians tend to prefer catfish, which are carnivorous and which actually feed on commercially valuable fish. I think that is something food economy and the preference of catfish, which is actually beneficial, which is non-beneficial to the commercial fisheries, to the carps and so on. So I think that is the relationship about the crocodilian and the fish. In fact, in Bhopal, Van Vihar, we had released some gharials in a very large captive breeding pond, large captive breeding pond, gharial breeding pond. We have released gharials as well as, maybe a few kilograms, something like 20, 25 kilograms of, live fish. And about 10 years later, I think, they said, the gharials and the muggers have bred in that enclosure, and they are actually in a flood season, they are actually moved out of the pond, out of the captive breeding pond. And therefore they invited me to go and have a look at that. And I said, can we remove the water of the pond, and so that we can actually segregate the crocodilians, the mugger crocodiles from the gharial, and then we can actually capture all of them and then realize, what is the situation. It took us about a week long to remove the water from those ponds. But in the process, we actually found about 300 to 500 kilograms of fish in that pond. So I think, what everyone thinks, if you release fish in a crocodile area, they are injurious to fish production, is a classic example of actually only the fittest and the very healthy fish actually survive, and they breed successfully and they actually increase in large number. And in captivity, I gave the example of Van Vihar, but similar cases are also reported in places like Katarnia Ghat, where the fish catch seems to have been increased after the gharial release program has initiated. In fact, the fishing was banned for some time, but illegal fishing goes on, and the illegal fishers, they have a field day. The same is the case in Chambal. Fishing is banned, but the illegal fishing, where it happens, they say fishing in Chambal has never been so good. It is much better now with the gharials and the crocodiles back in the river. So I think, it is interesting to know the crocodiles in the water is actually helping fisheries in a big way rather than the other way around.
So that's what, each and every animal has a role to play. We have understood. But whatever little understanding we have clearly indicates that, you remove one species, there is going to be a cascading effect on the system. You remove elephants, they are like fantastic dispersers of seed. You go and see elephant dung or tree species regenerating from elephant dung. Actually, I did at least 20 species of tree in the forest I saw being germinated from elephant dung during the monsoon.
Yeah,
so what the role that play elephant is.
Crocodiles don't seem to have anything to do because their digestive enzymes are so strong that anything they don't chew, they just gulp everything down, and their digestive systems are so strong that what they defecate is just calcium, white calcium chalk-like defecation, and there is nothing that they can propagate with. The scales of the fish they eat, can only be seen, and on a dietary analysis of crocodilians based on the fecal sample analysis, we found basically scales and very, very rudiments of scales or scales and bones. So their digestive systems are so efficient that nothing seems to be remaining undigested in a crocodilian's digestive system, alimentary canal. That is efficient food economy. Probably everything that has to be taken out of the food in the form of metabolism requirement is actually absorbed by the crocodilian in the alimentary canal. But other than that, they don't seem to have a different role of seed dispersal or anything. They certainly have other species associated with their body, parasites and so on, mollusks and parasites, taking a free ride on their body. Other than that, they don't seem to be helping any other species as far as my knowledge goes. Maybe the elephant has a better role to play as the seed disperser and also facilitating food for other. I think debarking trees or taking a branch down while feeding and helping other herbivores feeding on the leftover food by the elephants. I think they are facilitating feeding by other animals. Probably the crocodiles, because they swallow everything, they don't seem to be facilitating feeding for other animals in the water. Probably a few animals which escape the injured animals which escape the abuse by a crocodilian or abuse by a gharial, maybe facilitating other animals like otters, but otters are efficient animals by themselves. So there is probably not much of facilitation by crocodilians as far as the food chain is concerned.
Yeah, what I meant was both the species are absolutely, they play a critical role in maintaining the system, or rather activity of their habitats.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can probably open it to the floor. Participants, if they have questions to ask or some doubts to be cleared, it would be useful to listen to the people who are participating here.
Thank you so much for the conversation. Yes, Professor Chaudhary, we'll open the forum for questions, which will be moderated by Sanjay now. Sanjay, kindly take ahead, take this forward, and I can see there are a few questions. Please take this forward, Sanjay. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello?
Sanjay, we can't hear you.
Sanjay, can you be a little louder?
Give me one.
Yeah.
No, we can't hear you.
Am I audible now?
You are audible, but your voice is cracking. I don't know for whatever reasons. Maybe your audio system is not very good.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, just give me a few seconds, sir. I'm so sorry for this glitch. Is it good enough, sir, now? Is it audible?
Yeah, it's audible.
Okay, thank you so much. So that has been a very insightful discussion, I must say. On behalf of Aksha, I would like to say before we go to Aksha that the presentation done by Professor Chaudhary was really good, very insightful, covering almost 360-degree aspects, I would say, talking about crocodile as well as elephant. And the discussion also between Dr. Pandav and Professor Chaudhary was very interesting, covering the different aspects. So there are a few questions that team has as well as the audiences has, and I'll just straight away go to that. So there was a fleeting reference by Dr. Pandav about the saltwater crocodile. So there's one question about it, that is there anything similar to gharial conservation planning that has been done for crocodile conservation, saltwater crocodile conservation planning? And also, since we talked about the population issue also, so is there any note that you would like to add about repopulation of saltwater crocodile in West Coast?
Bivas, are you going to answer that, or you want me to tell something about it?
You please take it, sir.
Okay. I think, see, in 1975, 74 actually, India started the Crocodile Conservation Project, and it was meant for all the 3 species. Odisha is the state where the projects initiated for all the 3 species. For the Gharial, it was along the Mahanadi in Tikarpada. A center was created, and eggs were brought from, wild-laid eggs were brought from Narayani, Royal Chittavan National Park, and artificially hatched, and captive rearing was taken up, and then they were released back into the Mahanadi River. And I think you must have heard in the month of May, after so many years, 50 years or so, the Gharials have started to breed in the wild in the Mahanadi River. But similar was the case as far as the saltwater crocodile was concerned. A center was created in the Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary, a place called Dangmal, and wild-laid saltwater crocodile eggs were collected. Simulated nest incubation was taken up, and they were hatched and reared in a rearing center set up in the Dangmal Crocodile Rearing Center. And every year, after about 3 years of rearing them up to 1.2 meter size class, when they could be sexed between male and female by cloacal probing, a certain percentage of male to female ratio was maintained, 1:2.5, 1:3, 1 male to 2.5 to 3 females, and they were released back into the Bhitarkanika Sanctuary. And today, from the release date of about 1977-78, the first release took place in Bhitarkanika. Till this date, 2021, every year a population assessment is being done. And the most recent population assessment of saltwater crocodile in Bhitarkanika is somewhere around 1,750 animals. But that includes all size class, including hatchlings, including yearlings, and so on. But when you make a population assessment of saltwater crocodile, because the hatchling mortality and the juvenile mortalities are so very high, on the population assessment, they are not taken into account. But even then, the subadult and adult size class of saltwater crocodiles in Bhitarkanika would be somewhere in the region of about 600 to 700 animals, which is extremely high density anywhere in the world. I think the northern territory in Australia has one of the highest density of saltwater crocodiles, and similar is the case in the Bhitarkanika. But not the similar high densities occur in Sundarban, West Bengal, or Sundarban, Bangladesh, nor in the Andaman Nicobar Island, nor in the Yala National Park or any other national park of Sri Lanka, where the saltwater crocodile occur. So I think the densities of saltwater crocodiles benefited by conservation efforts, and therefore I think it is important for us to know. But in the west coast of India, only around 1940 probably a saltwater crocodile was reported somewhere near Cochin. And beyond that, there has been never a report of a saltwater crocodile on the west coast of India. On the east coast of India, south of Bhitarkanika, only twice or thrice only saltwater crocodiles have been captured, and they were believed to have been migrated either from Andaman Nicobar Island or from Sri Lanka. The saltwater crocodiles are capable of moving into the saline waters, and up to 1,800 kilometers into the sea, the saltwater crocodiles have been recorded. So I think the saltwater crocodile can inhabit in an extremely saline environment, and they have the lingual glands and the lacrimal glands through which they excrete the excess salt from their body, and therefore they are capable of living in extremely saline habitat. And that is why the saltwater crocodile, also known as the Indo-Pacific crocodile, has the widest distribution range of any crocodilian of the 23 species of crocodilians in the world. Indo-Pacific crocodile it is known as because it has the widest distribution of any crocodilian species of the world.
Coming to the question on populating saltwater crocodile along west coast, I think the habitats are very limited. The deltaic area or the riverine areas or the estuarine area that we need to have saltwater crocodile, they are very, very limited. And it is a potentially dangerous animal because of all the crocodile species, Nile crocodile and saltwater crocodile are known to be most prone to human-crocodile conflict. So we have to be extremely careful while releasing or while artificially putting this potentially dangerous animal into new areas.
In fact, one of the first article of the India's crocodile conservation project, described by the National Geographic, there is a gentleman by name, I think probably Rick Gore was the author of that article. He wrote, please do not take crocodile releases into the wild like releasing buffaloes into the wheat field. I think, as Biva said, that is the case. I think, we cannot be releasing crocodiles in every conceivable habitat. I know it has to be, it's a wide ranging animal, large home range it is requiring. So you need to be looking into West Coast. The rivers are very steep, they straight away drain into the Arabian Sea with very little deltaic area. So the littoral forested scenario where the saltwater crocodile inhabits, that patch of land, that patch of habitat is in the West Coast is very, very small. See, if you take the case of Kerala, it was estimated somewhere around 1970s, there were 70,000 acres of mangrove in Kerala. And today there are probably less than 10,000 acre of mangrove at entire Kerala. So I think, where is 70,000 acre? Where is less than 10,000 acre now? So I think, also similar is the case, the mangrove habitat or the littoral forest in Karnataka is not really very large. Gujarat, where the littoral forests are there is no record of the saltwater crocodile. North of Cochin, there has been no record of the saltwater crocodile. So that will amount to introduction rather than reintroduction.
Right. It's such an honor to hear both of you with so much of insights. And I shouldn't be saying that, science and research is a very integral part of the conservation. And you both belong to WII, you have enough exposure to the other non-government organizations. So this next question is directed to both of you. So when we consider these two giants, the amount of research that has been done on the conservation issues with respect to elephant, and amount of research that has been done on conservation issues with respect to crocodile, would you like to throw any light on this in terms of, is it enough? Or do we have a good amount of information to take it on, as Dr. Panju said, that we require a very local level of management. So considering these two giants and considering the conservation issues that both have, is there enough amount of research has been done?
Yeah, I think so. I think, 1970, early 70s, India started its conservation effort. I think now 73, the tiger project started. 74, the crocodile project started. And I think, the elephant project started, a little later than that. But I think, if you actually look into the publications, peer-reviewed publications, you will probably, crocodiles will still take the cake. A lot of publications have originated out of crocodile research because it involved 3 species. So naturally 3 species and therefore the number of researchers. And also interestingly, Crocodile Conservation Project was the only project which actually appointed PhD researchers to start the project. There were 7 PhD researchers which were employed by the Crocodile Conservation Project in the country to start the project. And therefore, there are probably 7 or 8 PhDs, which have originated out of that, at least 7 or 8 PhD theses. And today, I think into the IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group members, there are over 300 members in the IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group across the world. And from India alone, there are probably more than 20 Crocodile Specialist Group members. And there has been long-standing, very, very long-term research projects which has been operational, producing extremely good papers. One of them is, of course, Chambal project by Jeff Lang and others. The other, of course, I talked about the population assessment by the Vitarkanika, by Sudha Karkar. He did his PhD and he's still continuing to do that work. And we have continued to produce, papers of Andaman Nicobar, what kind of population densities are there, what kind of human-crocodile conflict happens, and so on. And Dr. L.A.K. Singh, who has done his PhD on the Gharial, as well as Dr. Sushant Chaudhary, who later moved from a crocodile researcher to a elephant researcher. Because we are talking of two giants, it is Dr. Sushant Chaudhary who did his PhD on Gharials in Uttar Pradesh. Later, he became an elephant researcher. So I think he has published papers on elephant. So I think both these species have enough publications at this point of time. Human-elephant conflict is actually producing a lot of literature at this point of time. Fragmentation of habitat and why the depredation of crop happens by elephants. A lot of papers have been produced, but also the mechanism by which human-elephant conflict can be contained to some extent. There are more management-oriented research papers which are being published. And I think, with both the giants, I think, as far as India is concerned, a lot of papers have been originated. I think, currently, I am actually sitting with 3 papers, which has come to me for review. One on the Magar crocodiles from Nepal. The other is a Magar crocodile work in the Tamil Nadu. And currently, I know at least 5 people are still pursuing their PhD on crocodilian work in the country. So I think there has been enough papers, paper and research as far as crocodiles are concerned. And Bivas can probably add a little more as far as elephants are concerned. Dr. Sukumar and his team probably has produced a very, very large number of publications on elephant work on the southern elephant population. And similarly, a lot of papers on the elephant has been published by Dr. A.J.T. John Singh on the population of elephants and their behavior and so on the foothills of the Himalayas, on the Tarai belt and so on. So I think, there is enough paper published. And Sri Lanka, again, I think a lot of paper published on human-elephant conflict, elephant translocation into different areas, a lot of work has been published. So I think, yes, a lot of paper has been published. Maybe Bivas will add a little more onto the information that he knows of.
Yeah, actually, there is no end to research. That's why it is called research. We have to keep searching for new things. But I strongly feel for both the species, crocodiles and elephants, we need to do a lot of good population ecology work. There is a need for long-term monitoring of elephant populations. Basic parameters, we may have done a lot of work, but for many areas, basic parameters to model the population growth and to predict how these populations are growing or going to go in future is not available. They may be available in certain pockets, but not all populations of elephants across the country. So I would say much more detailed quantitative information on population ecology of both these species, like say locally overabundant saltwater crocodiles in Bhitarkanika, or for that matter, elephant populations which are highly into conflict in states like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, and West Bengal. We need to do good population ecology work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think similarly, I think, when we talk about crocodile work, I think, the crocodile conservation project in India started with the concept of Head Start. I think, you collect eggs, you hatch them, increase the population significantly by making a lot of otherwise non-surviving individuals to survive. Survival rates in the crocodile project was, above 75% of survival of hatchlings. And, that means, within a time frame of 5 decades, you produce from, less than 200, 300 breeding animals to around 15,000 animals, of the 3 species in the country. So that's a fairly large population increase of a high fecund animal. But I think, it is time to think of, whether Head Start programs are something that is required any longer. I think using Head Start program, even in Australia and US, only 15% of the animals are returned back to the wild. I think, in the Indian situation, we are releasing almost 100% of the animals back to the wild. I think, are we actually increasing the population at a rate faster than that is required? So I think, we need to be questioning these kind of questions, and, perhaps put a moratorium to Head Start program so that the population will not increase, the human crocodile conflict cases will not increase, and so on. Because if you are putting a species into a species like crocodilians into human crocodile conflict situation, the crocodiles as such are in a very low public esteem. I think, very soon the crocodiles will become a persona non grata. It's a non-required species in the conservation scenario. So let's not invite a species to be brought into a situation where people don't want crocodiles to be there in the wild. I think, it would be the conservation effort itself will be the doom for the species in the long run. I think, we have to be very conscious, and we have to be very, very conscious of what kind of information is required and when to put moratorium to some of our efforts.
Right. So that leads to a next question, sir. When it comes to these insights, and if I take it to the next level of educating about these insights to the relevant stakeholders. So relevant stakeholders such as Forest Department, policymakers, common people. So how much efforts have been done, again, for two species, for translating such insights for the education purposes to work on the conservation issues?
Okay. I think, it's very interesting. I think, the crocodile project, when it began in mid-70s, I think that was perhaps the only project in the country which actually created an institute for training. Central Crocodile Breeding and Management Training Institute was created in Hyderabad, which was operational from 1977 to 1984. I think, they trained officers from the Forest Department frontline staff, range officers, ACFs and DCFs on a 9 months diploma, which was called Crocodile Breeding and Training and Management Training Institute. So I think, a lot of effort has gone to train people professionally how to manage these species. Unfortunately, it did continue after that. It actually became part of the Wildlife Institute of India. There was one module in which, crocodile breeding and training management was being given on the module. But as far as education and awareness is concerned, I think, crocodile conservation project are rearing centers. I think, there are 39 rearing centers throughout the country. I think, Tamil Nadu had 5 centers, Andhra Pradesh has 2 centers, Odisha has 3 centers, Bihar had 1 center, Uttar Pradesh has 3 centers. So I think, when you look into Gujarat has one center. So when you look into these centers, these are visible centers where people can go and see how do crocodiles lay their eggs, what is the clutch size like, how do they hatch, how do the parental care takes place, how do they grow, how are the rearing takes place, what do they eat. All these informations are provided to people who are visiting those centers. So I think each of these centers which are visited by people in default become an education and awareness center. But also, I think, slowly, since late 90s and early 2000, a lot of crocodile areas are also becoming very popular tourism destinations. People visit Bhitarkanika, people visit Sundarban, people visit Chambal to see crocodiles. I think Crocodile Watch has become a buzzword in the tourism sector, wildlife tourism sector. So I think, it also provides a lot of information to people, those who are visiting. More proactively, of course, the papers which are published, brochures, booklets, leaflets, posters, and so on, they have been educating. But at an international level, the IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group has taken a yeoman service by educating people at all levels. Any kind of publication you can download from the IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group's website, be it a researcher's requirement, be it a public requirement. I think, a lot of research material, a lot of education awareness material is available. I think, one of the very innovative range officer in the Tadoba Reserve, Tadoba Tiger Reserve, one of the innovative range officer who was trained in the Crocodile Training Institute. He also was instrumental in breeding crocodiles, rearing crocodiles in captivity and releasing them into the lakes in Tadoba, and he placed a board, crocodiles in lake, swimming prohibited, survivors will be prosecuted. Okay, so I think it's a tongue-in-cheek humor, but I think sometime that tongue-in-cheek humor also spreads the word. People get to know a lot of interesting facets of that. So I think yes, a lot of education and awareness material still exists, but as far as education and awareness is concerned, there is never an end to it. It has to continue all the time.
Absolutely. I would just like to take it forward, the tongue-in-cheek humor, which has come as a signboard. So one element that we see common among both species in the common people's mind, I would say, is a fear. Fear towards crocodile and fear towards elephant. So this is just I would say, I would request from both of you just a point of view. It's not to propagate one or other, but how this fear, and it's a very hypothetical question, so many caveats, how this fear can be utilized for education, both species, be it a crocodile and elephant, and has it been done already on the ground? Has it seen any result? Because I feel there are mixed emotions when it comes to elephant, and when it comes to crocodile, I think it's a primarily fear. So how this element can be used in education among the common people?
Okay. Devas.
Yeah, you got to understand the animal properly. You got to have some basic information, basic knowledge about the animals. Otherwise, the kind of situation that we saw, the rescue operation in Mahanadi to rescue an elephant, it's totally uncalled for. You are not supposed to do this kind of daredevil things in front of a highly dangerous animal like elephants. So some basic understanding of the animal is absolutely essential. And those informations are available in through lot of forms. And of course, right now, at the press of a button, you get almost all sorts of information about all sorts of animals. So these are not potentially, these are actually dangerous animals, and you have to be careful of these animals. That doesn't mean that you should not approach them. I have been observing elephants and crocodiles both for hours together in the forests of India. You know how to approach an elephant. You follow the wind direction. They have very poor eyesight. They have extremely good sense of smell. Use wind to your advantage, and you can approach elephants very close and observe them in the wilderness. There is absolutely no problem. And you must also keep it in mind, where is the escape cover in case the wind direction changes? If the elephant detects you, how are you going to escape? So keep all those things in mind. And all these things come through experience, comes through accompanying people who are very well aware of elephants, or not only scientists, researchers, even tribals, or even people living in elephant habitat. They are storehouse of information. Some very basic common sense can help you in observing these dangerous animals, in studying these dangerous animals, and in understanding these dangerous animals.
Yeah. I think, also, I think, when we talk about crocodilians, I think, I talked about 11, 12 states, where the Crocodile Conservation Project was initiated. And every crocodile rearing center in the country had an interpretation center. So I think people visiting there visited the interpretation center, and there they knew everything about crocodilians. I think, even if you go into places like Australia, northern Australia, Queensland, and so many, the places like northern and eastern coast of Africa, Australia, you will find world-class interpretation centers which actually inform you about crocodilians. The Crocodile Specialist Group's chairman, Dr. Graham Webb, runs a captive crocodile breeding and management and farming center. And his interpretation center is probably the world's one of the best crocodile interpretation center, education and interpretation center. So I think, a lot of interpretation center established has also informed a great deal of information to visitors, particularly to group visitors like school children, college kids, common man who are visiting the interpretation center. They are educated. But at the same time, when the crocodile population assessment, field surveys are carried out, local people, local communities are participating in them, and they in turn carry it across to the villages. So I think, people living along the riverside are also educated by participating in activities. So that is another way of educating, taking across the information about the species. But in having said that, I think, a human life lost either because of crocodile conflict or human conflict is a cause of concern. Also a cause of concern is an elephant getting killed or a crocodile getting killed as a retaliatory killing. I think, we have to make measures to reduce both the mortalities. Elephant mortality and human mortality because of a human-elephant conflict, human mortality and crocodile mortality because of human-crocodile conflict. We need to be addressing these issues. And I think, the GIZ supported project, Human Wildlife Conflict Management Project, which is operational in Karnataka, West Bengal, and Uttarakhand, and across the country, is probably going to address all that. I think, let's see what kind of, suggestions come out of that project. But at the same time, the innovative ideas are also coming from the field practitioners, in the forest department and other researchers who are working in the field. So I think it would be a culmination of right approaches by juxtaposition of innovative ideas plus new ideas which are emerging out of the project. So we will probably see in future a lot of new ideas coming on this particular subject area.
Right. It's already past 8 o'clock, but I'll just take last 2 questions before we conclude. So one little off the track question, but interesting one. It says that would like to know about otters and crocodiles coexistence since they are seen as competitors. So is there any remark you would like to say?
Can you repeat that question? So
it says that would like to know about otters and crocodiles coexistence since they are seen as competitors.
Okay. Well, I think, one need to understand that in an aquatic habitat, just like the tiger is an apex predator on the terrestrial system as a carnivore, I think, the crocodile as a carnivore is the apex predator on the aquatic system. There are a lot of other animals which are inhabiting in the aquatic habitat. Take the case of crocodile sharing the same habitat with the national aquatic animal, the Gangetic dolphin, the river dolphin, otters as another species. There are a lot of other freshwater large fish, which are catfishes and so on. I think there are also species which are obligate to the aquatic habitat. Not necessarily they live in the aquatic habitat, but they cannot survive without going to the aquatic habitat. A lot of terrestrial animals. They are not co-competitors, but they are associated species with crocodilians. I think there is not much of a competition between the 3 species. They are sympatric only. Gharial and saltwater crocodile don't inhabit together. Gharial and mugger inhabit together. Mugger and saltwater crocodile inhabit together in the Yala National Park in Sri Lanka. So I think, these 2 species are sympatric. They do resource partitioning. Their hatching times are different. Their nesting times are different. So they don't compete with each other. So they cohabit in the same area, being sympatric, and they do resource partitioning, and that is how there is no competition between the 2 of the same crocodilian species. But there are also other associated species who do not compete with crocodiles at all. Their food requirement are different, their breeding requirement are different, so there are not much of competition between associated species with the crocodilians. And similar probably is the case with the elephants. There are not many species which inhabit with elephants, but they are not competing with elephants. I think, elephants browse, their food requirement is, much higher on a tree canopy. They are not competing with browse species, which are actually at a much lower height, they are browsing. So I think, a herbivore herbivory and herbivore specialist will probably answer that much better. Bibas can actually answer that in a much better way.
Elephants are actually great facilitators. There are three kinds of feeding habits of elephants. One is debarking, just pulling out the bark. One is breaking the crown, that's called crown breaking. And the third form is pushing down the trees. So when the elephant pushes down a tree, it not only it helps in the elephant feeding on those, all other animals also come and feed on those things. So that way elephant facilitates. And besides that, mega herbivores like elephants and rhinos, which feed on coarse grasses, actually feeding on coarse grasses gives rise to growth of very young or tender grasses, which facilitates other herbivores like, say, hog deer, swamp deer, inhabiting the similar habitat to feed on nutrient-rich grasses. So
the
that's
classic
how
case is
they are
Kaziranga.
they do not compete with each other. Rather, they facilitate survival of other species in the forest.
Right. Very interesting, very interesting. That, and I go to the last question now. So considering there are conservation issues specific to the crocodiles and specific to the elephants, and the direct, I would say, manager or concerned stakeholder is the forest department. So there are two things. One is the economic implication, and the second is the, let's say, the time share taken by addressing the specific conservation issue coming from a crocodile or coming from an elephant. So considering these two aspects, one is the economic implication, second is the time share taken by addressing those conservation issues. So any light that you would throw on it, it's kind of not exactly a comparison, but how would it work at a forest department level, addressing the conservation issues economically and time spent to address those issues?
I think, when you are dealing with conservation of animals such as elephants, crocodiles, tigers, leopards, and a lot of other animals, which are in the IUCN Red List category, Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Protection Act. I think, there should be less concern about the economic implication. I think, one has to realize as human beings, as citizens of this nation, constitutionally you are obliged to take care of every single species that inhabits. So I think, the moment when you look everything on an economic terms, I think conservation will take a backseat. I think, it's extremely important for us to realize, I think, what this country gets in the name of conservation, the forest and wildlife gets probably just 1% of the national economic budget. So I think, there is absolutely no economic concern at this point of time as far as conservation is concerned. And if only 1% of the budget is going to conservation, taking care of the forest and wildlife, what would be the contribution of that 1% into every single species you are talking of? So I think, but having said that, it is also important for us to realize it is one of the country with 150 years of forest and wildlife conservation history in this country, with an extremely dedicated and extremely large number of staff. I think, very few countries in the world can actually claim to have such a organized, regimented, trained, staff in place. I think, we still say the Forest and Wildlife Department is understaffed, but I think, let us also realize that many countries can boast of this kind of staffing pattern. So I think, everywhere, I think, the economic concerns should not be a major concern when we talk about conservation. So that would be my take. Bivas may have something else to add to.
Yeah, it's we are doing it case by case economic evaluation of tiger reserves and those things. But for me, it's a very common thing. Huge amount of ecological services these animals are providing. These animals are providing in the sense the habitat in which these animals are there. If we do not protect those things, our food security will be at stake. Our water security will be at stake. So there are a lot of things which are intricately related, not necessarily can be evaluated, and no need to evaluate also. So I would say it's huge economic benefit the country is getting by protecting these animals. We are not draining our resources or anything. Rather, we are enriching our resources. And nowadays, when you talk about carbon stock and other things, so that gets into billions and billions of dollars. So wildlife conservation is a must, not for survival of the species, but for survival of mankind, survival of human beings.
So one of the point you put across, you talked about all the, let's say conservation issues by species, and you talked about a tiger and leopard and, elephants and crocodiles. So I'm so sorry, I'm tempted to ask this last question, sir. Excuse me for this. When we had discussed about two giants like crocodile and elephant, and when we look at, the lot of efforts which are taken by a different non-profit trust, Government of India, about the conservation. So 7 decades ago and now, is there a change in approach seen not only by Government of India, but several institutions, several bodies like IUCN and a lot of other organizations, if I had to say, is there an approach changing and evolving from single species to considering several species to considering ecosystem and going forward in terms of policy level changes, in terms of overall conservation planning? Is there any approach which is changing over a period of time if we consider last 7 decades as a time frame? And that's the last question, sir. To both of you, Dr. Pandav and Professor Chaudhary.
Well, I think, conservation management is adaptive management. You cannot actually say, I will cut the coat, according to a size and that should fit all. No, it doesn't work that way. I think, you will have to realize you have given your input into a conservation management of a species, of an habitat, of a ecosystem, a certain number of years. I think, and they will respond back. I think the habitat will respond back, the species will respond back, and then you will have to think. For example, the crocodilians, we started the Head Start program. We have to produce a large number of crocodiles at the shortest possible time frame. In other words, you are actually shifting a species from a critically endangered to endangered and probably endangered to less threatened and so on. So it is not a one-way traffic, moving from not threatened to a critically endangered. It also should be the other way around. I think, the green, now the red list, now there is the IUCN is actually talking about the green list. I think that's a policy shift. That's a policy shift that is happening. Whether our conservation efforts are going for the benefit of some species to the extent that they are no longer in the red list. Are we going to look into efforts that are bringing species into the green category? Are we going to actually make a plan, species recovery plan, which will make a species go from a red list to the green? These are the kind of changes which the IUCN as a apex conservation agency in the world is actually looking at. I think, that is, we are talking at a global level, at a local level, at a country level. I think, these are a reflection of what is happening at the global level. But also at a country, what is happening at a site-specific area also influences, what changes you will bring in. Okay, so I think, the human-elephant conflict, probably brings into the question, what should we do with the 101 corridors that has been identified? We are probably taking a cue that we must understand the situation of the corridors. How can the corridors be managed so that, the migration paths remains unhindered, and therefore the less number of human-elephant conflict cases can arise. So I think, these are all local issues, which goes into management regime. So I think, it is important for us to realize that the management regime keeps on changing, looking into what is the global push that is given for conservation, but what is the local requirement that is also helping conservation issues. I think, it is a reflection of both think globally, act locally. I think, which is what is happening as far as the conservation scenario is concerned. I think, 10 years ago, no one would have thought that, country would have declared the Gangetic dolphin as a national aquatic animal. Okay, no one would have thought, the Prime Minister from the rampart of the Lal Killa will declare the National Dolphin Conservation Project. No one would have thought that. So I think, these are, small changes happening, but changes do happen. Okay, but there are also, whoever has thought of linear development projects like the national highways or the state highways, thinking of, underpasses and above passes to be made for elephant movement, tiger movement, and so on. So I think, so it's important for us to realize, yes, there are sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen too. But I think, it's a mix of good and bad. We will have to take everything with a pinch of salt, where it is helping conservation, where it is not helping conservation. I think, where it is not helping conservation, as conservation biologists, as conservationists, we should be pointing this out to the government, sometime to the extent that you might actually be singled out as someone who is anti-government. It might be also the case, it might happen also. So I think, one has to be extremely careful about dealing with it. But I know as a conservationist, as a conservation biologist, you have a role to play. You will have to point out that if this is done, this is going to be the problem for the habitat. This is going to be the problem for the species.
Thank you, sir. Anything Dr. Pandey would like to add?
Yeah, I would say two major changes that has happened over the last 50 years is we have moved from small protected areas to large landscapes. We were talking about 200, 300 square kilometer area in 1970s. Now we are talking about few thousand square kilometer, protecting habitat over few thousand square kilometers at a landscape level. And second thing, from an exclusive approach of protected area concept, we have moved into more inclusive approach. Even within the purview of protected areas, we have community reserves, we have conservation reserves. So the different kind of protected areas are being declared. So there is more and more participation of people, I feel is happening at this point of time. So the attitude is also changing from exclusive approach towards more inclusive approach. I would say these are the two major changes I would see, rather than many other things happening.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, and thank you for.
There is a great paradigm shift which is happening. I think the paradigm shift in the conservation approach, I think, whoever has thought of, benefits beyond the boundaries of protected areas. But, I think, people are now talking about what are the benefits of beyond the boundary of protected areas because of the protected areas. No one was talking about ecosystem service of a protected area. Okay, everything was, tangible benefit was only thought of. But nowadays, intangible benefits, is increasingly being talked about. The ecosystem service is increasingly being talked about. And I think those are changes which are happening.
Thank you so much. Thank you for accommodating the last question and giving enough time, sir. It was my honor to talk to both of you and take the question on behalf of the team and audience. Thank you, Dr. Pandey. Akshay, would you like to take it over and conclude?
Akshay, yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much to both the speakers. Thank you, Sanjay, for moderating the session and taking the questions. It's very insightful and very powerful. It's a very enlightening session. Thank you to both the speakers for giving us your precious time. And to the audience,
there is a lot of extra noise coming out of, someone has actually kept his audio on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for unmuting. Yeah. So thank you so much to both the speakers. And it was a very insightful evening, to be honest. And like both the speakers gave an overall picture, like Sanjay said. Now we know the ecology of it, the biology of it, and the conservation issues. Thank you so much once again. And thank you to all the people working behind the scenes. Thank you, Karthik, for managing and conducting this event. To all the people, you'll find this event later uploaded on YouTube and also on Facebook. I hope to see you next month on the Friends of Elephants event. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Akshay. Thank you very much, Sanjay. And thanks for giving us this opportunity to interact with you people.
Yes.
Thanks.